morning from Vietnam. Good afternoon to you, Urs. Thanks a lot for spending your afternoon to join our Insight Sharing and share your stories to our global audience. And on behalf of the listeners around the world, we want to say thank you for your participation.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, huh? I look forward to the conversation.
Well, Urs, you've been travel around the world, living and working in 4 continents. Have you ever traveled to Vietnam?
I have not. So, actually, Asia is the continent I haven't really traveled to a lot at all. So, a bit embarrassing, I know, but it's the truth. Yeah.
So then please put it into your bucket list. Now you have a new friend, new family. A lot of our speakers travel to this country and we met and we have a good time together. So I'm sure that we missed you last time in Seattle. We're going to miss you in Vietnam one day, okay?
Absolutely. Or next time you're in Seattle, we'll make it work for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Urs, in our culture, it's very honored for our audience if we can have you to share a little bit about who you are, the works you are doing to our audience. Would you please kindly do it for us?
Absolutely. Well, that's an open-ended question. So I I'm a leadership guy. So I live and breathe leadership and have really done this for, ever since I've been, a young teenager, actually. So that's, the work I do now. But going back, so I grew up in Switzerland. So I grew up outside of Zurich and went to university there. And during my younger years, I was a competitive cross-country skier. I skied for the Swiss university ski team. I'm still a keen skier. I love ultra endurance competition to this day. Move my body outside in the mountains, preferably, is something I enjoy. And then at the end of my 20s, I moved to Australia and I pursued my PhD, which people always are surprised by, which is in geography. So I actually studied geography in my late 20s and spent 7 years in Australia doing my postgrad work in geography. I also then transferred to business there, went to business school, and then I moved to this country, the US. Oh my God, now 24 years ago. I've been in Seattle for 24 years and primarily in leadership development, and we can talk more about my work here, executive coaching, and now speaking and writing. And then in between, about 7 years ago, I rejoined the military and I served as a NATO peacekeeping commander in the Balkans. And then 3 years ago, I went to the Middle East and served for the UN in Lebanon and on the African continent in Egypt for a year as a peacekeeper, which, is, we can talk about that too. It's a wonderful experience. It's humbling, it's interesting, it's maddening, and so many other things. So these are the 4 continents I've worked on and lived on. So Australia, Europe, where I grew up, Africa, and of course, North America, where I currently live. So that's it in a nutshell. We can go deeper anywhere you'd like.
Urs, you have a phenomenal journey that you introduced to us for less than 2 minutes. So that is for sure. It's not fair for our audience to have a full understanding or at least more understanding of your life. So we're going to travel time together and let's travel all the way when you were young, okay? Because when I was little, I always wanted to become an astronaut and go into a different planet seems pretty cool for me. But life didn't give me any opportunity to do that, except that in the journey of interviewing amazing leaders around the world, we've been able to interview one of the 12 people ever walk on the moon, and his name is Charlie, and he's the youngest man ever walk and even drive a rover on the moon. He's the first one. And so for you, having the journey now of traveling around the world on special missions, writing the books that help leaders getting better and live and breathe leadership, right? We want to understand where that seed of idea coming from. So when you were little, what was your first dream about the works that you are going to do in the future? Was
Actually, I'm not sure I can really pinpoint the first one. There were two. And as a European boy, a soccer professional, I wanted to be a professional football player, unsurprisingly, which little boy, at least back in the 70s, didn't want to do that? And so, and that was, I sort of knew a bit of a pipe dream. But maybe more seriously, it's actually interesting that you wanted to be an astronaut. I really wanted to be a pilot. I loved flying. My dad worked for 25 years for the Swiss International Airlines, Swiss Air, so we could fly very cheaply or for free different places. And my dad was also passionate about flying, so I really wanted to be a pilot. And so leadership, wasn't really part of that. So I'm talking, as a child, younger than 10, 12, and then I actually pursued becoming a pilot at 16 for the Swiss Armed Forces. But you know what? That was one of the first real failures or humbling experiences I had in my life. I didn't pass the training. So I actually got kicked out because I wasn't very good under pressure back then at 16. And so that was a difficult experience, to be quite honest. So so pilot is what I wanted to be back then. And so I'm now sort of a leadership guy, but that didn't start until my mid teenage years. And frankly, it developed both because I was influenced by my dad, who was a corporate executive and an amazing leader, one of the best humble leaders I've actually ever met. My dad was, and then also my experience in the Boy Scouts. So that sort of whet my appetite for leadership. But really, to answer your question, a pilot, that's what I wanted to be.
Alrighty, a pilot, right? Alrighty. So before we talk about your experience and falling in love with leadership in the middle of teenage years, okay, we want to bring you to Australia. Okay, so you spent 7 years there and study your PhD there on geography. All right, you can choose any major, any areas to study for that 7 years. That's a long period of a lifetime, right? So why geography?
So I actually have to go back. So geography was the PhD in Australia, but I did my undergrad and master's in Zurich, and that is coming back actually to my dad. So it's a little bit of a longer story. So when I was 14, my dad took 3 months of unpaid leave from his corporate job to volunteer in a refugee camp in Mogadishu. So he worked in Somalia and volunteered in a refugee camp. I was 14, and back, this is in the 80s. Being gone for 3 months was sort of my dad being gone was sort of a big deal. And when he came back, he told me about his experience and, all the issues he saw, obviously the huge challenges, the pain and suffering that he saw and experienced for himself. And I got really interested in how come, suffering and pain like that happens. And then at the same time, we were studying in geography. We're studying resource scarcity. This is high school. Resource scarcity, how it can lead to refugee streams. And so all of a sudden, my very mediocre grades in geography went from mediocre to very good because I could connect what we're studying in school with what my dad told me about the experience and how, again, resource scarcity and fight over land and colonial backgrounds and whatnot led to the problems now on the ground where he was working. And so that whet my appetite for geography. So I started to get really interested in how does the human system hang together with the environmental system. And so I then all through my high school years loved geography. And, not geography, what people think of. It's not pointing to the right capital on the map or being able to identify which country sits where, but really it's about how the systems, the human systems and the economic systems and the physical systems hang together and interact with each other. And so then I ended up studying geography, and frankly, a very privileged position. I was just interested in it. I never thought about for a second, what would I do later in life as a profession? I just loved what it represented, the problems it could solve, and so that's how I ended up studying geography. But then another twist. So I thought I would get into what was back then called overseas aid, international work, international development. But the professor was not my cup of tea at all who had that subject. And so I ended up studying tourism research. And so my master's and my PhD were actually in climate change impact research. So I studied impacts of climate change. Remember, this is 30 years ago. Nobody in this country, in the US, even talked about climate change back then. How climate change impacts tourism industries. And so that was what led me to go to Australia. But I actually went to Australia first, and I know I'm going all over here, but this is my life for you. I actually went to Australia first to train on snow cross-country skiing, because I told you earlier I was a competitive cross-country skier. And Australia, many people don't know, actually has a lot of snow. And so I went to Australia numerous times beforehand to train in the Northern Hemisphere in summer on snow. And I fell in love with Australia. I fell in love with the vastness of have you been out to Australia?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the vastness of the continent. I mean, coming from Switzerland, where everything, it's beautiful, Switzerland is, but it's everything is small and like this, every village. But in Australia, this vastness, the blue sky, the sea. Also, I love the people. They were so friendly and very much into sports like I was. And so when it came time for me to decide where do I do my PhD, I went, you know what? I'm going to go abroad and I'm going to Australia. So I went on a quest to find a university that would take me. So I ended up in Canberra, the capital. And so that's how I ended up in Australia and studied so out of the 7 years in Australia, I spent 2 on my PhD actually, and then did some consulting out of my PhD, and then actually went to business school in Australia as well and worked there as a corporate management consultant.
Wow. We all start with your father's stories about his time serving in Africa, right? So
Yeah.
it seems like your father is very interesting figure, and he has a lot of impact and influence on your life. So now let's share a little bit about that gentleman. So what else did he do that influenced your journey that leading to what you're doing today, Urs?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so my dad was was an amazing dad. He worked too much though, and he had sometimes trouble relaxing. So I don't have a I think I have a very realistic view of my dad. I admire him for many reasons, but I also see that there were some downsides how he led his life. But he truly, I write about, humility, radical humility. He truly was a humble leader. He was a highly successful corporate executive. He ended up, as a C-level executive at Swissair. He was a professor for mathematics in parallel. And so, that in itself is, impressive and good, but he always was modest. My family had one car, a VW Passat, and he wouldn't drive, it's just an example, drive any flashy cars. I will never forget, he told me the story. He picked up another executive from the airport who was, a bit of a bigwig and only, used to Mercedes. And so my dad drives up in the VW Passat, and the other guy was an American, goes, "Oh, I guess the wife has the Mercedes, right?" And my dad said, "No, we don't have a Mercedes at all." Anyway, but then what I really loved about my dad was he was unconventional. So at 52, he decided not to retire, but to step down from his corporate career and become a cheesemaker. He actually learned to make cheese. He went to the Swiss Alps for 4 summers together with my mom, and they were living in a hut making cheese. And so it's an incredibly, people don't know that it's an incredibly hard job. You get up at 4 a.m. You have to bring the cows in. You have to milk the cows twice a day. You make cheese. It's hard physical labor. And so my dad had this ability to make unconventional choices. I mean, the Swiss media, by the way, loved that. So there were all articles all over the media, like top manager becomes cheesemaker in the Swiss Alps and whatnot. And so I love that. He assessed his career every 5 years. And then, unlike a lot of people, actually made changes when he felt, okay, I want to now experience something new and different. And you and I know how many people talk about one day I will, one day when blah 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 I will, and then never actually follow through. And so that has inspired me too, as a son, to make unconventional choices. For example, for me to go and serve in a peacekeeping mission after having been out for 23 years out of the armed forces, rejoin it, almost 50, with outdated military knowledge. So that's really inspired that sort of ability to make unconventional choices in me as well. And then, I hope it's okay to talk about this on this show with you. My dad had a horrific stroke when he was 70, and then actually died by assisted suicide, which is legal in Switzerland. And people have very different views about this, and I respect all of them, some of them on principle, some of them religious based. But my dad was unconventional and uncompromising until the very end. So he decided after a horrific stroke that he didn't want to live like that anymore, and then died, surrounded by his family, my mom, my two sisters and I, by assisted suicide in Switzerland in 2010. So sort of until the very end, he very much lived life on his terms, and that is something that I aspire to as well. So anyway, you ask about my dad. As you can tell, I have a lot of stories about my dad. He was a wonderful man and a great example. And the book is dedicated to him. He's one of the best humble leaders I've actually ever met. So very important person in my life, no doubt.
Wow. I'm sorry about his loss, but I think he had been living a life worth living, every moment, because it's on his terms, right? And
Absolutely.
Earlier you mentioned the one thing is very important is that people keep saying one day I will, but that one day never comes. And it's really, really important for that message to come across, so that, every day, every moment is a moment for us to really step up and make a decision to change and lead in the life that we want to do. So curiously, what brought you to Seattle in 2001? After 24 years ago, you said.
Yes. So why do people move around the world? Two reasons. You know what they are?
No.
Either love or a job, right?
Let me guess. Love.
Yes, and yes, exactly. So it's my ex-wife now. It's all good. We're on good terms. But yeah, my ex-wife, the mother of our children. So we met actually in Manhattan. So when I went to business school, I did a stint in Manhattan at NYU, and she was living there, and then we moved together here to Seattle. And honestly, that was and I know obviously you have lived in Seattle. It was a bit of a lifestyle move. We both love the outdoors, to ski, trail run, mountain bike. And as you and I know, Seattle is an amazing playground for all these outdoor activities. It also happens to, be fairly vibrant in terms of its economy, and there were a lot of interesting things happening at the beginnings of the 2000s, of course, namely Amazon, although we didn't know about that at that point. And so we felt that Seattle is a great balance between an outdoor paradise while still, being interesting enough and big enough so that there is economic opportunities for our business to grow. So that's what made us move to Seattle. And now, honestly, I have two boys. I have a 17-year-old high schooler here in Seattle and a 19-year-old who actually just left today on his travel gap year. I just drove him to the airport this morning. He's going to Nice, to France, to immerse himself in French. And so my younger one has about a year and a half left here in Seattle until he's done with high school. And then honestly, I'm not sure. I really would like to spend more time in the snow, like really in the snow. And so I might, sell my house here and have a little apartment where I can do this, lock the door and be done and walk away, versus maintenance and whatnot. So a bit more flexibility. But I want to can I just underline and double click on what you said earlier? I want to come back to this one day and then one day never comes. I think it's easy for us to say that. You need to take life into your own hands, and you need to make those choices, because sometimes, the day never comes. But I think it's important to be realistic about it as well, because it does mean sometimes that you actually have to disappoint some people. When you make some unconventional changes and when you make or take steps that are not sort of, same old, you might actually have to push back against people in your life who don't want you to make that change. So what I'm saying is it requires guts, and it requires, really some courage sometimes to make unconventional changes. When I joined the peacekeeping force, my family was not in agreement because, I was gone for a long time. So it was hard, right? And some of my friends would say, like, why would you do that? Why would you give up a successful business or give up, take a time out? But I was so deeply committed to it that I was okay, with, I guess, the disapproval of some people. So I guess what I'm saying is it requires us to be strong and be okay with some people disliking our choices. Not everybody's going to applaud when you sort of charter your own course.
Before we talk to your time coming back at the, after years, and, so that you're coming back as a peacekeeper, I want to ask you this one because earlier you mentioned that 30 years something ago that you joined learning about climate change, and back then not a lot of people doing that. You also been in the space of executive coaching for a long time, for at least 20 years plus. And back 20 years ago, executive coaching or coaching is barely exist, right? So you have an eyes and attention to look for something new and to go into the direction like that. So where did that ability come in from, Urs?
That's a great question. That's interesting because I actually don't think of myself, honestly, as someone who's a great pioneer in terms of, pursuing new things. I think, climate change, to be fair, back then, started in Europe, started to become a topic of research. I think what the commonality between climate change in its early days and my interest in my research in it and in coaching, to your point, I mean, my first coaching workshop, oh my God, nobody knew what they were doing in 2000 in Sydney, Australia. It was hilarious. But maybe it's more about really knowing when I land somewhere where I know I belong. I knew I belonged in the climate change impact research community because I was deeply passionate about it. And it actually didn't matter if it's something new or if it's something that had been established for a long time. Same with coaching. I will never forget this first coaching workshop. It's the Wild West. Nobody knew what it was. In the US, it was a bit more advanced. But I landed there for a weekend workshop and I knew immediately, like, helping others to achieve their goals, helping others to get better, helping others to become better leaders at the end of the day. That was something I was deeply passionate about. So it was maybe more about being in touch with what really drives me versus pursuing something new and different.
Wow. Now I go to the times as in the military peacekeeper. Okay. Yeah. What brought you back?
So how I told you that initially I studied geography because I wanted to get into international work. I call it mission work, not religious mission, but just meaningful international work. And so then when my dad passed away in 2010, I was approaching 50 and I had a good hard look at my life. And I asked myself, what are the things I don't want to look back on and say, I wish I would have, coming back to our early conversation, no regrets. And doing meaningful international work was one of the things I really still wanted to do, because over the years, I would, window shop sometimes jobs with the International Red Cross or, with USAID. We don't have to talk about that right now in the States if it's sad, but different international organizations, including NGOs. I would window shop for jobs sort of half-heartedly, but I never followed through. So then when I was approaching 50, my dad passed away. I had a good hard look and I went, okay, I want to still do meaningful international work. And so then I applied not just peacekeeping. I applied Médecins Sans Frontières, like a lot of different organizations, international organizations, some government and some NGOs. And then I found peacekeeping. And I went, I have responsibility, which I was very clear on. I wanted to have some responsibility. I also wanted to get paid. I was paid for a variety of reasons, primarily because when you volunteer, you often are not valued because you're volunteering, you're not paid. I wanted to have some responsibility. And so I checked all the boxes. And yeah, I've been an officer 22 years ago in Switzerland. So I went and applied. So I joined through the Swiss Armed Forces. So I had to fly back from Seattle to Switzerland numerous times for assessments, psych evaluation, physical, and then you had to role play with a village mayor and all that stuff. So, and I loved it. So I decided to apply, and then they took me, and then I went to training, and then I deployed in the end.
Wow. And for how long?
So in the Balkans, I was for 9 months, and in the Middle East, I was for a year. Yeah. So
2 years.
Yeah, exactly. So, coming back to the motivation, so I said I still wanted to do meaningful international work. I also, and I really mean this, as someone who lives in the privileged world, I actually see it as an obligation for us to make a difference and to give back. I really strongly believe that. I know it sounds a little bit, maybe altruistic or out there, but that's really how I feel. I also, as someone who's in leadership development, as a coach, as a speaker, as a writer, to go back into an organization and, have direct reports, have peers, have bosses, like actually do the work that my clients normally do, like that is so healthy. And I love leadership, as I mentioned earlier, right? And so I love living it as well and being in charge of a team and working through challenging issues. So it sort of ticked a lot of different boxes for me.
Wow. Was there any tension moments during the 2 years that you served, the dangers and anything you want to share with us, Urs?
I was actually lucky. In the Balkans, it was very quiet. Honestly, the most dangerous thing was probably like happy shootings. They celebrate. And in the Middle East, I was in Lebanon and we are all familiar now what happened between Lebanon and Israel. And again, I moved to Cairo for my other job within the mission just a week before artillery fire started. So there were a few tense moments, on the blue line, what's the ceasefire line, but nothing, honestly, fortunately, nothing that made me really uncomfortable. I know other than that, we also, had very good training, and I was always one of the oldest officers. So I'm, pretty risk averse. So I'm not aggressive. I'm like, let's talk about this. Let's take a step back. And so I tried to avoid, of course, those situations.
How did you get alignment with the people in your family when you say that they push back on your desire to go into international works like that?
So it was primarily my boys, actually. So my boys did so, and that was hard. Let's be very clear about that. So my boys didn't want me to go, and I still made the decision to go. And I didn't get alignment, frankly. I mean, I could, it's the difference between, can you hear me and do you agree? They were able to hear me. They were younger then. They were, 10 and 12. They were able to hear me, but they didn't agree at all. And so it was one of those situations. And that's why I mentioned what I said earlier, that sometimes it's even, even more difficult that when we have to sort of, push back against people who we love, right? And I got some slack from people, close friends who said, how can you do this to your children, right? And so I'm very clear that it was a big sacrifice on everybody's part, including mine, but probably certainly more on my boys' part. But it was something that I felt was so important that I wanted to do that I guess I put my own needs at that time first. So fortunately, we have a wonderful relationship, and we were able to maintain our relationship, thanks to modern technology while I was deployed with daily phone calls and, text messages and whatnot. But there's no question it was hard.
Yeah. I think it's important as a leader, you have to make hard decisions, and then you set an example for your boys and the people around you. One day they will face with hard decisions, then they need to weigh in which one is more important, what one is more long-term impactful, and for them to to put some sacrifice on the way. All right.
Yeah, absolutely. Very true.
Yes. So now go into the book. All right. My first questions coming from my friends and the audience is, what took you so long to write the book?
What took me so long?
Yep.
I love it. Well, so do you mean until I started to write it, or what took me so long while I wrote it?
I believe that the idea of radical humility has been with you for a long time. It should be sitting there somewhere.
Yeah.
And why didn't you write, like, let's say 2005, 2015, right, but 2024?
Look, this is a great question. Honestly, the honest answer is I was a bit cynical about books. I really felt, do I really want to add another book to the leadership library that says the same thing and nobody reads anyway? So that was my sort of view for a long time. And people, like, have told me for a long time I should write a book because of my varied background. We haven't even talked about, the ultra endurance competition stuff. And so, but then what happened was, what took me so long, when I came back from my second peacekeeping mission to the Middle East, the one I talked about in Lebanon and Egypt, then and only then did I feel I had a unique lens. I had something that not many people have, I can add into the book. And so, yes, humility has been interesting to me on a personal level for a long, long time. Before I even did leadership development, I was always drawn to people who were highly successful, but who can say things like, hey, I'm not quite sure about this. What do you think? Or, I made a mistake. Let me get this right. Or people who, are super successful, but always want to know more. So I was always drawn to people who were humble. But then the concept of humble leadership probably started to emerge for me about around the financial crisis, 27, 28, 2007 and 8, when a lot of my executive coaching clients were still leading very top-down command control, very old school, and they were always a step behind. And so and I asked myself, okay, there must be different ways to do this. And so then, of course, I found, situational leadership, servant leadership, and then I found humble leadership, and I thought, okay, there is something here. And so I started informally to think about and study humble leadership, just about that at that time. But then really only, to answer your question again directly, when I came back from the second mission, did I think, okay, now I actually have something that I can offer to the world. And then frankly, there was also a very practical aspect to it. At that time, I launched my speaking career. And so now I primarily, spend time on stages doing keynotes. And a book, of course, as you and I know, is a good piece of thought leadership. And it forces you to really think through your stuff, like much more than in a speech, I feel anyway, in a very systematic way. And so, so that's what got me to write the book.
Wow. And have you ever heard the name of this lady? Her name is Edith Eger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she's a Holocaust survivor. She wrote the book called The Choice, very famous herself. And on the book, she writes that she believes that people are not coming to her, people are sent to her. So those humble leaders are sent to you, so that for you to explore the journey. So how did you, from your experience with those amazing humble leaders, and becoming a leading expert in humility, in humble leadership? Tell us, what did you do to make you become an expert in humble leadership, please?
Well, I think, hopefully what everyone who's sort of just attempting to become an expert does. So it's a combination of really living the experience myself. So, as I mentioned, in the military, going back and actually applying what I'm writing and thinking about, like the humble leadership principles, like relationship building, like deep self-awareness, like build psychological safety, actually applying it in the real world myself. I think that's an important piece. Too many experts, don't actually do that. They do all the other stuff, which is you think about it, you research it, you talk to other experts, you do what we're doing right now, you go on podcasts, you write books. But I do feel in order to have true credibility, we need to do all the studying, know all the research, and keep following it. but we also do potentially, primary research as well. But I actually feel that the important piece of living it yourself and applying it yourself is often missing. And so I'd like to think, look, I know on my bio it says I'm the leading expert. You got to say that, right? That humble person in me reads this, I'm going, no, no. So that's what I think what needs to happen. You need to live it. You need to research it. You need to be in touch with other folks who are deeply passionate about it and who are leading experts. So one of the things that I'm deeply humbled by is Professor Amy Edmondson from Harvard Business School, the queen of psychological safety. She's been a wonderful supporter of my work. And so being able to, share my thinking with her and her supporting my work, like that is truly meaningful to me. And I'm deeply humbled. Actually, a quick funny story. So 3 days after my book launched in March of last year, NATO called and asked if Amy Edmondson and I could do something together at NATO HQ in Brussels, Belgium, on psychological safety and radical humility. And so, unfortunately, Amy Edmondson couldn't make it, but I just came back. That's why I'm a bit jet lagged, probably. I just came back yesterday, and I gave a keynote and a 3-hour workshop and participated in a panel for NATO on the importance of psychological safety. So that was honestly, one of the highlights of my speaking career so far, was to be able to bring psychological safety to a military-based organization like NATO. So that was very special to me. And also because I've been serving for NATO in the Balkans as a peacekeeper, and of course served in uniform as well for the UN. So and that was very special.
Wow, amazing. So, for the radical humility, how long did it take you to write the book?
I can tell you exactly 21 months. So
21 months.
Yeah, I just published a handbook on my journey of writing the book, which people can download on my website at urskoenig.com. It's a free resource. If you're thinking of writing a book, this could be a helpful resource. And so I talk about my whole journey of writing, producing, launching, and marketing Radical Humility. Yeah, it took me 21 months, but I did a net. I actually really did the numbers. It took me about 1,500 hours, so 1,500 hours to research and write the book. So that's almost a year worth of work, net.
Yeah. Wow. And when you wrote the book, who's the audience you're targeting, and why the audience will benefiting from reading Radical Humility?
So it's primarily, primarily business leaders, so middle management, to maybe even first-time supervisors, and so anybody who's looking at ways to lead teams successfully in today's technology-driven, super fast-moving world will benefit from it. I truly believe that. So it's the humble leadership approach is a deeply relational approach. It's about building strong relationships with your team members, empowering them, so build psychological safety. And so in my book, that's the right thing to do by our people, for sure, but that's not actually why I postulate humble leadership. I postulate humble leadership because the world actually requires it. If you think about it, leading today is by definition humbling. No one person can know it all or do it all, right? I mean, we have an inversion of expertise. If I'm your direct report, you're my boss, you will be never able to know as much as I do about my content expertise area, because you have 7 other direct reports. And so it's an inversion of expertise. So in order for me to trust you to bring all the information out of my area of work to you, we need to have built a strong relationship. And so that's where the humble leadership comes in. The faster things move, the more complex our world becomes, the more we need to actually empower and delegate, and trusting and meaningful relationships are at the core of that, and at the core of humble leadership.
Wow. You spent a year of researching, 21 months to publish the book. And we want to ask you the basics for this. So in your own description or definition, how do you describe humble leadership to be?
Yeah, so it's 3 pillars. So the
Yeah.
first one is deep self-awareness. This is what people think of when they think of humility. Like I see myself accurately, right? So I see myself not too high, but also not too low, like accurately, right? So deep self-awareness. And then I already talked about the relational leadership. So what I call tough on results, tender on people. It's not about being nice or kind necessarily. It's holding my people to the highest standards while building meaningful and collaborative relationships with them. And so that's the relational aspect. And, both one-on-one, but then also organizationally or in the team. And that's where the psychological safety comes in. And then the third piece is a growth mindset. So seeing mistakes and failures as an opportunity of learning and growing versus something to be ashamed of, or worse, even sweep under the carpet. And so those are the three pillars of leading with humility, or radical humility in leadership.
To self-awareness. Then the last one is grow awareness and to grow myself. At the middle one, I couldn't write down in here. So maybe you can help us to understand a little bit more about the middle one, please.
Absolutely. So the middle one is the leading relationally. So I lead by relationship versus simply by content expertise. So this is where, I mentioned tough on results, tender on people comes in. And so let me make this come alive. How does this look in practice? When I sat down during the Kosovo deployment, I was called into my boss's office. He was a colonel, I was a captain. He sat me down and he opened the meeting and said, Urs, I love you. You know I do. And your work is not even close to being good enough. It's not good enough by a long shot. So his word made me shrink in my chair. I knew he loved me. And he didn't just say that because we've spent, by that time, 6 months together working. He took an interest in my career path. He knew about my family. He knew about my sons. He really got me. He wanted to help me to go to the next level. So I knew it wasn't just empty words, that he really loved me. And then he was able to communicate that this is not even close to being good enough. So he was able to hold the high standards. If he would have yelled at me, if he would have chewed me out, I would have tuned him out. I'm like, oh, whatever, it doesn't matter. But because I knew he cared for me, I was really able to hear the tough feedback and act on it. And by God, he was right. My work was not good enough. And I had to turn it around, and I did. And I made sure I never, ever disappointed him again, because we built this strong collaborative relationship. So it's this notion that being tender on people gives me license to be tough in results. If you and I have built a collaborative and trusting relationship as a direct report and a boss, then I'm much more able to hear the tough feedback that you have for me. So that's the leading relationally.
Wow. So we said that if we can build a collaborative and trust relationship, then anything can, we can grow things on top of that, right? And leading and so the fundamental is what we need that, all right? So how can we build that collaborative and trust relationship? It's not easy.
Not easy.
Hmm.
It's what these things are all, everything I talk about and write about, it's very simple, but it's not easy, right? So how do we do that? Let's think about, how do I deepen a relationship? How do I do it in my personal life? And I literally write about this very thing in the book. I do it every day. Hopefully I do it with my friends, with my family members. I do it by conversation. I do it by opening up a little bit. I do it by asking questions that I'm genuinely interested in. I ask you questions about how your day was, and I actually really want to know. And then I listen versus just think about what my next question will be. And so we do the same thing in a work environment. We don't have to have, we don't need to be best friends with our workmates. That's not what I'm talking about. But I'm talking about seeing my team members more than just as a worker bee, actually taking an interest in them as whole human beings. And that does mean opening up to whatever level you're comfortable with. And, you live in Vietnam, I'm in the States, I'm from Switzerland. We have different cultures. It varies by culture. Some cultures, you're much more likely to go very deep, very quickly. Other cultures are more reserved. It also depends, of course, on your personality. If I apply humble leadership as a leader, I will have different depth of relationships with different people, and that's totally fine. Some people want to, just talk about the weekends and that's it, bit of small talk. And other people really would like to have deep, meaningful conversations about, the meaning of life and whatever, end of life decisions, whatever it might be. And so, so this is why leadership is a thinking person sport, right? You have to read the situation. If I'm aiming at deepening a relationship with you, and I ask a question that's a bit personal and you seem uncomfortable and push back, like I need to be able to read this and go, okay, now maybe not. Okay. And so that's how you deepen relationships. And yeah.
Wow, wow. I pick up some words in the conversation that we had that really you live a life, a living example as a humble leader. Like earlier you say about hopefully, when you mentioned your word, but you say hopefully that is relatable to other people or and things like that. So it seems like if we want to move from the old traditional leader to leadership approach onto a humble leadership, we need to apply a new set of dictionaries, also vocabularies onto our daily like practice, right? So where can we find that dictionary and to start to learn and get used to it to help us to build that collaborative and trust and become more humble leaders?
So this is going to sound very self-serving, but actually I have stuff in the book about exactly that. So and I love how you seem like they're so perceptive, how actually of you, I do, really work hard on not being arrogant, and I think I'm sort of naturally maybe a bit more humble, but you're exactly right. It's in the words too. So words like I know, they're not very humble, but I want to learn more. Tell me more. Like that's humble, like having better questions versus having all the answers, right? And so let me find actually, I'm having my book here right now. I have a table at the end where I sort of summarized behaviors and some of the vocabulary that we might use. So for example, do you want to be a soldier or do you want to be a scout? A soldier defends his or her view, and a scout explores new options, right? I want to be a scout. I want to be wrong. You know why? Because then I learn something new. Every time I'm right, I'm like, I knew this already. It feels good, I guess, to be right, but I actually want to be wrong because then I learned something new. I thought something was true and then I was wrong. And so, it's about being right. It's about getting it right versus being right. And so, if you ask specifically about the vocabulary, it's about asking more questions and having less answers. And by the way, the more we know, the less we know. The more we know, the better our questions get, right? Our questions become more intelligent. And so that's sort of the how I would think about how our vocabulary needs to change.
Beautiful. Thank you. Normally, when I ask our speaker, we ask, a chapter that he or she likes most about his book or her books, right? But this time I'm going to change, okay? I believe that in your book, there will be many, many stories of many, many, humble leaders, good example out there. So if you can pick one out of the people that you mentioned in the book and you want to share with us their stories, share with us and why you chose that individual, that stories.
Absolutely. Because I'm a humble guy, the story won't be about me, right? But there is plenty, honestly, there is plenty of stories in there, personal stories. One that I keep coming back to is actually, it's a military one, is actually General McChrystal, who wrote the book Team of Teens. Maybe some of your listeners and you seem to be knowing it as well. And I like his example, and I'll tell you in a second, because it is one of the first examples of a humble leader in the military. Also, by the way, Marquette, who wrote Turn the Ship Around, is actually another one. He's a fellow speaker. You should have on your show if you haven't had him yet. He's pretty amazing. But General McChrystal, just super briefly, was leading the task force fighting terror. Is an American general in the Middle East. And he realized that the way he led his task force was very old school. Lots of silos, top-down command control. And they were fighting Al-Qaeda at that time. And they were always a step behind. You know, Al-Qaeda was always a step ahead. And unfortunately inflicting a lot of pain and suffering to both the task force and the civilian population. So McChrystal humbly admitted that what I'm doing doesn't work. You know, it actually requires self-awareness. If you're a four-star general to go, you know what I'm doing is screwed up, it's not working. So he changed the leadership of his task force from what he called leading like a chess master controlling his pawns on the chessboard, to leading like a gardener. If you think a gardener, you can't make plants grow. You know, much like you and I, we can't make our people do stuff. But what we can and what we must do when we lead like a gardener is plant the right seedlings at the right spot in the right time, provide a nurturing environment by watering, weeding, so our people, our plants can flourish. So McChrystal moved from top-down command control, leading like a chess master, to providing the right environment, the right culture based on strong relationships, very transparent communication. He even got into trouble with the intelligence community because he shared too much information to their liking, but he wanted to be transparent so people had the information they needed to make good decisions. So he had the humility to say what I'm doing is not working, and then he had the humility and the tenacity to shift from leading like a chess master to a humble creator of the right environment, the right culture. And so that's so McChrystal is really a wonderful example. And I actually happen to think, despite of how he ended his career, which was unfortunate, he got fired by Barack Obama over some stupid remarks he made. But he's actually, to this day, he also speaks. I really perceive him as a humble person as well, not just a humble general.
Probably that's the reason why his book is right on your shelf in the team of teams right there in the middle.
Yeah, exactly. Next to Amy Edmondson's. Yeah, and then Jolie, The Heart of Business. Exactly.
All righty, wonderful. Thank you very much for bringing up his stories, and he's amazing gentleman and general also. So, three last questions for this conversation. Okay. And the first question is for you to tell to yourself, because in your middle teens, teenager time, you fall in love with leadership, right? You said in earlier conversation like this. And so now, if you have a chance with me to travel time to meet yourself back then, maybe when you're first having the love for leadership, and you can tell the journey that young version of you going to be having the journey in the future, what would you tell that young self?
What would I tell young self? I would tell young self to go, it sounds strange, but go abroad earlier. Like actually go. And even though, I spent now a lot of more of my half than life abroad, like away from my hometown Switzerland, from our home country, go abroad earlier and pursue leadership positions and responsibility with even more vigor and earlier as well. So that's what I would tell myself. Yeah, because I was hedging, honestly, in my 20s, I was hedging a little bit. I wasn't quite sure. Maybe I shouldn't generalize, but I was certainly unsure of myself. What do I really want to do? But I would tell myself to go for it earlier.
Wow. I think that answered the question why now. The one day I will, you always live in that principle that you do it instead of, waiting for that one day to come, right?
Right, exactly.
So,
exactly.
Urs, the next question is about the future. Okay, because
Yeah.
we travel the past, we know the present. Now we want to know the future. Is there anything exciting you are working on? You want to share with our audience so we can celebrate with you in advance?
That's I love that question, and the humble answer is I'm not entirely sure what the future brings. I don't have, an exciting thing, an easy exciting thing I could share with you in terms of, oh, I have a next book. But what is exciting, is that I get to really shape how I want to spend my time and energy in my work over the next year or two. And I haven't ruled out actually doing another mission as well. And so I love what I do right now. I love the thought leadership. I like the book. I like the speaking. But I also think about that I want to spend some more time again going back to my passion of athletics, doing more uphill travel on skis, and potentially going back into a mission. So uh, I'm not sure what the future brings, and I'm actually doing some very deep self-reflective work right now, talking to mentors, doing my own journaling about how I want my professional future to look like over the next 2 years. And the work is ongoing, and I don't have a good answer right now. It is, I humbly admit, I don't know. I'm working through it and figuring out how I want my professional life to look like over the next few years.
Whatever it comes out, I believe it's going to be always amazing. So,
Oh, thank you.
all right. The last question was is about thinking. So earlier throughout this conversation, you mentioned about the word think, and you help people to improve their ability to think through your workshops, through your speaking engagements, through the works you do. So through your books also to help leaders become better leaders, right? And that's by teaching their way of thinking. And my wife and I, we've been on the quest to help people to unveil the secret how amazing people around the world thinks. So, and the simple reason for that is we see our thinking capability these days has been diminishing for so many reasons. And if we can pick, the secrets from, from experts, and people can pick and apply in their lives. Hopefully, they will be able to think better, and that can start the transformation journey for themselves. So, over the years, how have you been growing your ability to think?
How have I been growing the ability to think? I so I'm going to answer the question, but I'm also going to say one other thing. Thinking is important, super important. And I think it's important. I think it's important to realize that as humans, we're primarily feeling creatures. We're primarily feeling creatures who occasionally, the joke goes, we think we're thinking creatures who occasionally feel, when in truth, we're emotional beings who occasionally think. It's probably not entirely true. But the way I improved my thinking was by becoming more thorough. Frankly, as a teenager, I wasn't particularly thorough in my thinking. Honestly, I went, it's good enough, it's good enough. I was a bit careless, maybe. My mom would give me a hard time when I did homework. I was, good enough is good enough. And so the way I improved my thinking was by peeling back the layers and asking better questions and more meaningful and deeper questions. Like, that is the ticket. And not, like, honestly, some of the work I did as a teenager for, assignments in school, I peeled back one layer, maybe two, asked 1, 2 questions, and then just, went with it. Now, and it's ongoing, by the way, it's ongoing. Hopefully, I will think better in 5 years than now. Hopefully. So asking deeper, more meaningful, and better questions. That is what helped me to improve my thinking, and doing things like what we're doing right now, having conversations with smart, interesting people about what I'm thinking about, and inviting them to challenge me. Like, that's improving my thinking. Not hanging around with the people who always agree with you anyway. That's not going to advance my thinking. I need to be hanging with people who challenge me, who disagree, ask hard questions in hopefully a respectful way. That's the ticket.
Beautiful. Beautiful. As I have the last question, but I'm curious to have one more question. Is that possible?
Of course, yeah, yeah.
All right, all right. So they say that the value of a man is by the five people that he or she associated most time with. So for you, Rose, who are the people in your inner circle?
What are people in my inner circle?
Yes.
The people in my inner circle are my two boys, no question. I talked about them earlier. It is my two sisters. I have two younger sisters. My mom, even though they live in Europe and I live here. And I have a significant other as well. So that's probably around five, right? So let me think. Who else? Yeah. And then this is my inner circle, like my immediate family, siblings, mom, sons, significant other. And then, yeah. And then around that, as a lot of people, of course, people, it's interesting though, people come in and out of that circle too over time. And as I moved around the world as well. And, there's nothing wrong with that. So I have certainly had relationships or people in that inner circle who are not now anymore. That's totally fine. This is not because we had a fight, it's simply because our life changed and evolved, and we've been here and we went there, and that's totally fine.
Wow. Well, thanks a lot for the very beautiful conversation that we have today. And I really look forward for the opportunity to meet you in person if we travel to Seattle next time. So we're not gonna miss next time. Or if you decided one day you put Asia onto the map, make sure that you put Vietnam onto that bucket list, and I will be able to see you in our beautiful country too. Okay?
I would love that. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation. You're a great host, Tal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You have a wonderful afternoon, evening.
You too.
Bye bye, my friend.
Bye bye. Bye bye.